The first scream cut through the marble lobby like glass shattering. It was not loud at first, just sharp enough to turn heads, just human enough to stop feet mid-step. Security had already wrapped their hands around the janitor's arms, already dragging him toward the revolving doors, when the cry rose again, this time breaking, desperate, unmistakably personal. In a building where rank was everything and silence was discipline, that cry did the unthinkable. It froze power in its tracks. Before the story pulls you any deeper, take a moment right now, if you believe in kindness, in second chances, and in the idea that people are more than the labels placed on them. Please like this video, share it with someone who needs hope, leave a comment, and subscribe to the channel. Stories like this live because people like you believe they matter. The building itself was a monument to order and authority, all cold stone and polished steel, designed to make ordinary people feel small the moment they stepped inside. Generals and advisors passed through its halls daily, their footsteps confident, their eyes forward, their lives arranged in neat hierarchies. The janitor moved differently. He arrived before sunrise, left long after the last office lights went dark, and learned how to become invisible in a place that rewarded attention only to the powerful. His uniform was faded from countless washes, his shoes worn thin at the heels, his back slightly bent not just from age but from years of careful humility. He cleaned quietly, meticulously, as if every floor tile deserved dignity even if the man polishing it did not receive the same. No one knew much about him, and that was by design. He had learned long ago that questions led to stories, and stories led to pain. To most, he was simply the janitor, a nameless fixture, like the trash bins and mop buckets. To security, he was a background risk, a badge to be scanned, a face barely remembered. And to himself, he was a man surviving one honest day at a time, carrying a past heavy enough to bow his shoulders but never heavy enough to make him stop doing his work with care. The trouble began on a morning that should have been ordinary. The building buzzed with preparation for a high-level ceremony, the kind that brought pressed uniforms, polished medals, and a general whose reputation preceded him like a shadow. His arrival meant tightened security, sharpened nerves, and an unspoken rule that nothing and no one was allowed to disrupt the image of control. The janitor had been assigned to the main lobby, an unusual placement that day, but he accepted it without question. He worked methodically, eyes down, mop gliding across the marble as reflections of authority passed over him without acknowledgement. Then the alarm sounded, not the blaring kind, but the subtle shift that security professionals felt in their bones. A badge scan misread. A system flagged a mismatch. In a building where threats were imagined before they were real, suspicion moved faster than truth. Two security officers approached the janitor, their voices low but firm, their hands already hovering near protocol. He froze, confusion flickering across his face. He tried to explain, gesturing to his badge, to the assignment he had been given, but explanations from men like him rarely traveled far. Within moments, the situation escalated. The janitor was told to step away, to comply, to follow instructions. His heart pounded not because he was guilty, but because he knew how quickly innocence could be ignored when fear took the wheel. He felt the old weight return, the memory of a life once defined by duty and honor, now reduced to compliance and silence. When hands closed around his arms, not roughly but decisively, something inside him gave way. Not anger, not resistance, just a tired resignation that this was how the world worked now. As security began escorting him toward the doors, the lobby's quiet order cracked. People watched but did not intervene. No one wanted to challenge the process, to ask uncomfortable questions. The janitor's shoes squeaked faintly against the marble, the sound almost apologetic. He kept his head down, focusing on breathing, on the simple truth that humiliation was survivable if you let it pass through you instead of lodging in your soul. That was when she appeared. The general's daughter had grown up in places like this, surrounded by uniforms and formality, but she had never fully belonged to them. She moved through the lobby with a different energy, less rigid, her eyes scanning faces instead of titles. She had returned to the building that morning to attend her father's ceremony, carrying memories both proud and complicated. As she stepped inside, she saw the commotion near the doors, saw the janitor being pulled away, and something about his posture, about the way he held himself even in disgrace, stopped her cold. Her breath caught before her mind could explain why. A feeling surged up, old and unexpected, like recognition without context. She took a step closer, then another, her heart beginning to race. The janitor turned slightly, and for just a fraction of a second, their eyes met. In that instant, years collapsed. Hallways of a different building, a different time. A man in uniform kneeling to her height, offering reassurance when the world felt too big. A voice steady in chaos, hands firm but gentle. The memory hit her with such force that she forgot where she was. The cry tore from her before she could stop it. His name burst into the air, raw and unfiltered, echoing off the marble walls. The effect was immediate. Security halted, startled, heads turned. Conversations died mid-sentence. The general himself, still in a side corridor, felt the shift ripple outward. The janitor stopped walking. Slowly, as if afraid the moment might shatter, he turned toward the sound. His face changed, not dramatically, but enough to reveal something long buried. Recognition softened his eyes, then pain, then something like relief. For the first time in years, he was not invisible. He was seen not as a role, but as a person with a name, a history, and a connection that could not be erased by a uniform or lack thereof. The general's daughter moved forward, her composure unraveling as emotion took over. She reached the janitor, her voice trembling as she repeated his name, explaining through tears who he was, what he had meant to her, and why seeing him treated like a threat felt unbearable. She spoke of a time when her family's life had been defined by danger, when trust was rare and fear constant. She spoke of the man who had once stood between her and harm, not for recognition or reward, but because it was his duty and his honor. The lobby listened, stunned. Ed, the janitor's past, once carefully hidden, began to surface not as a confession but as a revelation. He had not always been a janitor. He had served with distinction, had carried responsibilities that demanded silence even now. After an injury ended his career and a series of personal losses dismantled his life, he had chosen anonymity over pity, work over applause. Cleaning floors was honest labor, and it allowed him to exist without reopening wounds that never fully healed. Security released their grip, uncertainty replacing certainty. The general arrived moments later, his presence commanding but his expression unreadable. He took in the scene, the crowd, his daughter's distress, the man standing quietly at the center of it all. Recognition dawned slowly, then with crushing clarity. This was a man he had once trusted with everything, a man whose sacrifices had been filed away in reports and commendations, then forgotten as time moved on. What followed was not dramatic in the way movies portray redemption. There were no speeches, no public apologies shouted across the room. Instead, there was a quiet recalibration of respect. The janitor was asked to sit, to breathe, to tell his story on his own terms. The general's daughter stayed by his side, grounding him in the present. The building, so used to projecting control, felt suddenly human, imperfect and vulnerable. The days that followed brought change, but not the kind that erased hardship overnight. The janitor was offered recognition he had never sought, support he had never expected. More importantly, he was offered dignity. His work was no longer invisible. People learned his name, greeted him with warmth instead of indifference. He accepted it cautiously, still wary of how quickly attention could fade, but grateful nonetheless. The general's daughter visited often, their conversations a bridge between past and present. Through her, the janitor began to understand that his worth had never been diminished by circumstance, only obscured. Through him, she learned that heroism did not always wear medals. Sometimes it wore worn shoes and carried a mop. The building changed, too, in subtle ways. Security protocols were reviewed, not just for efficiency, but for humanity. Staff were reminded that safety and compassion were not opposing forces. Small acts of kindness began to ripple outward, inspired by a moment when a cry in a lobby had forced everyone to look again. Time passed, as it always does, but the memory of that day lingered. The janitor continued his work, but with a lighter step, his back a little straighter. He had not been restored to his former life, but he had been restored to himself, and in that restoration there was peace. Near the end of the year, as the general prepared to retire, a quiet ceremony was held, not for rank, but for service. The janitor stood among others like him, men and women whose contributions had gone unnoticed for too long. There was no fanfare, just gratitude. The general's daughter watched from the crowd, her eyes shining, knowing that sometimes the most powerful changes begin with a single voice refusing to stay silent. If this story is touching something inside you right now, if you feel that tightness in your chest or that warmth behind your eyes, please take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who needs hope, and subscribe. Stories like this remind us who we can be when we choose empathy over assumption. And just before this story ends, I have one special request for you. Please comment below with a few words about what this story meant to you, or about a moment when you saw someone differently because you chose to look closer. Your words matter more than you know, because in the end, this was never just a story about a janitor or a general's daughter. It was about how easily dignity can be taken and how powerfully it can be restored. It was about the courage to speak a name aloud when silence would have been easier. And it was a reminder that no matter how far life seems to pull us from who we once were, kindness has a way of finding us again, calling us back into the light.